Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This morning, we're talking about anxiety. And statistics say that there are some 40+ million people who suffer with some sort of anxiety. And here to talk about that and also talk about a feeling of always walking on eggshells and how we can stop and get better is Robert Tavy. He is an LCSW, and he joins us to talk about his journey to helping people understand and get through anxiety. Robert, good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, Robert, tell us a little bit about your body of work.
Sure. I've been a psychotherapist for 45 years. About two-thirds of my work are couples and families, so I do a lot of that. I've written 12 books. I write a blog for Psychology Today. I also do workshops internationally and nationally on different aspects of mental health treatment.
Mm-hmm. You don't look old enough, Robert, to have worked for 45 years, to be doing this 45 years.
Good genes, I guess.
And you've been staying clear of anxiety, huh?
No, I'm like everybody else. Everybody's got it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And right now with the pandemic, so many people are filled with fear and anxiety.
Sure. And
we love Psychology Today, and we got a hold of the article that you had written, Walking on Eggshells and How to Stop. What prompted that particular article?
Yeah, as I said, I work with a lot of couples and families, and what I'm always curious about when I see them, and what I actually say to them usually the first time I see them, is I'm less interested in what you're talking about, and I'm more interested in where do you get stuck running your life? Where do you get stuck solving your own problems as a couple or as a family? Mm-hmm. And generally, because that's what folks need to move forward. You know, the arguments they may be having today about bedtimes with the kids or about money, 5 years from now, it's going to be about something else. You know, so the content of problems are always a moving target. But the process about how do you go about solving problems, communicating, working through things like that, that's the thing that you want to learn how to do. And I wrote the article because one of the key things I often see is exactly that. People get stuck in their relationships because they start walking on eggshells. They're afraid to speak up. They're afraid the other person's going to get upset. They're always kind of looking ahead and trying to figure out how do they need to be and what do they need to avoid doing so other people will like them or so they won't get in trouble. And oftentimes for a lot of couples I see, they complement each other in the sense that the one person's struggle is around walking on eggshells and feeling easily intimidated. And oftentimes they're paired with someone who has problems with anger, you know, and have a hard time with emotional regulation. So now you get this perfect storm of both of them kind of coming together where one person gets riled up because they're upset about something and the other person shuts down and they start to walk on eggshells. And now their ability to solve problems kind of gets shot.
Mm-hmm. And were you seeing that a lot? Did it start to trouble you that you said, I'm going to write about this because maybe a lot of couples or just people in general are dealing with this issue?
Absolutely. And I'm writing about it because I've been seeing it for years. And I'm saying it's one of the most common things I see. You know, when I look at, again, where do I see people getting stuck? It's usually, this is one of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things that get people in trouble. And so the challenge for, you know, my job is to help them realize that's the problem, not about bedtimes and money. And what can they do? And now we're back to anxiety. What can they do to learn to override this kind of anxiety?
Mm-hmm. And have people just lived with that kind of anxiety so long that it becomes commonplace and they don't even really know that they're anxious about it?
Sure. Or they call it something else, or they feel immobilized by it. You know, I wrote a similar article back last year, and occasionally I get these emails from folks who read the articles and they just send me an email. And I got this touching email from this guy, and he said, you know, I just read your article, and I'm 60 years old. And I look back at my life and I am depressed because I have so much regret that I wasn't able to step up and tell people what I needed and live my own life. I spent my whole life walking on eggshells trying to keep everybody happy. And now I feel like I'm running out of time.
If people come to that realization that they've been walking on eggshells wherever they are, if it's in their relationship, if it's in their job, it's wherever, how do you help people to find their voice? Because really that's what's lost, your voice.
Sure. What we're talking about again still is anxiety. Anxiety is about the future. You know, your head kind of runs ahead and it's about what if, and you kind of you start thinking about all these scenarios. If I say this, are they going to get upset? If I say something to my boss about something, or is she going to, retaliate in some kind of way? Is she going to? And so your head's always doing this. Now, where does it come from is the fact that, what I often say to couples and families is, as a kid, and growing up, particularly if you grow up in a chaotic kind of family, if you grow up in a family where people were angry, if you grew up in a family where people were alcoholic or they had mental health problems, if you grew up in a family where you did not feel safe for a lot of good reasons, as a kid, you only got 3 ways to cope with the world. You either get angry and try to push back, you withdraw and you pull back, or you walk on eggshells. And if you have siblings, a lot of times you bounce off your siblings. So my brother's the angry one and my sister's the quiet one, and I'm the good one. Whatever you picked worked. It helped you cope. And if you grow up in an unsafe environment, the other thing that you developed, again, as a tool to cope, was you become hypervigilant. I'm always looking around corners. I got to see what kind of mood my mom's in. I got to figure out if my dad's been drinking, because if he is, I got to stay in my room, or I got to make sure I toe the line so he doesn't get angry with me, or whatever it is. Whatever you picked as a coping style as a kid worked. It worked in the sense that you survived your childhood. It worked in the sense that it helps you stay out of trouble as much. And that's what walking in eggshells is about. How do I stay out of trouble? How do I stay under the radar? How do I not get people upset? And basically I do it by accommodating. I agree with them. I try to do my best. I try to toe the line. I follow the rules. I become the good kid.
Right. But then how do you show up later in life? You know what I'm saying?
Well, the problem is, whatever you learn to do as a kid, guess what? You don't turn it off. Basically, when I see a lot of people with anxiety, they're still hot wired and hyper vigilant the same way they were when they were 6 years old. Their boss didn't say good morning to them in the hallway, and their head is already worried about that their boss is angry. So what happens here is you get triggered. What happens here, you're hot wired for other people's reactions. You're hot wired, and you kind of toe the line around certain things, and it doesn't take much for you to get triggered. And what I say to folks, I feel it. Probably you feel it too. When this kicks in, right? You get this little kid kind of feeling in your gut. You're in trouble. You're worried. Something bad's going to happen. Everybody can get that.
Right. It takes you right back to where you were.
Absolutely.
When you were at that age, when you felt that. Let's do this, Robert. Let's take a break here. But when we come back, I want to talk about how we can create new pathways in our brain that can refire and help people to live a life less anxious. Stay on point, everybody. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Robert Tavy. He's an LCSW who's been practicing for well over 4 decades. He's written several books. And during the break, I told him, I said, I think every one of us really needs a therapist or a counselor on some level. All of us carry certain things. And when you talked about the position in the family, which position you took, it took me right back to, okay, what position did I take? And maybe people listening or watching are saying, okay, what position did I take? And then you get into that role and you play that role for your whole life in every area of your life. But here's the real kicker, Robert. How do you know If you're not in therapy, if you've never
Sure.
had this conversation, how do you know that you're in this role and it needs to be broken so that you can live a healthy, more authentic, free life?
Sure. Yeah, and again, for some people, again, we're talking about anxiety. For some people, they can feel it. You know, they can. They're always worrying. Their head's always running. For other people, they can feel it in their body. You know, they have different reactions to it. You know, when I'm seeing folks, they're coming in because they keep hitting the same wall in their lives. You know, I'm on my second marriage, and it feels a lot like my first, even though I thought it was going to be different, you know, or.
But you're not different, right? So it can't be different.
Right. You know, wherever you go, there you are kind of statement. Yeah. So you're bringing stuff forward. And this is where I'm saying, you know, I'm always curious about what's the one or two things that you have a hard time doing that gets in the way of you moving forward in your life. It's not 20. You know, it's usually one or two things that you're particularly hot-wired and sensitive to that gets you into trouble. It keeps you from being, you know, in the language what we were just talking about, it keeps you from being the full adult that you are.
Right. Let's pick one, okay?
Okay.
And I'll choose the one, truth, because a lot of people have a problem with the truth. Like, I'm not talking about lying and stealing truth. I'm talking about I feel a certain way, but because of this role that I played in my family, I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to rock the boat. So I acquiesced a lot, or I just didn't say what I was really feeling. And so people go into their lives, not, especially women, not being able to say what it is that they really want because of probably the role that they played in their family.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the starting point for that is, again, realizing, you know, catching it. You know, what I talk a lot about, folks, is you have your anxious brain and you have your rational brain. And at different times of the day, different brains are working, you know, and can you tell when your anxious brain is kind of taken over? Sure. You start to worry about stuff, or you do this kind of walk on an eggshell, or you go, never mind, and you kind of back up. You know, you do these kind of holding back kind of things. And so what the brain part of this and what the challenge is, I mean, there's a lot of ways of approaching it. If you talk to someone who's more psychodynamic, they're going to be talking to you about your childhood and trying to unravel it. My approach is I'm more concerned about brains and how do you rewire your brain. You can't shut off the channels that you've kind of cut in your brain, but you can create new ones. So the question is, how do you create new ones? Part A is realizing when this little kid part of me is kicking up, when my anxiety is starting to take over, when I feel myself holding back. You go, okay, my anxious brain's kicking out, the little kid part of me got triggered for whatever reason. Now I need to shift into my rational brain. I'm an adult, you know, and I do cognitive behavioral therapy, and a lot of it is how do you talk to yourself? You know, you take a couple of deep breaths and you realize, hold on, I'm not 6 years old here. You know, even though I'm feeling a little bit intimidated, my boss is not my father or not my mother or whatever it is. Are you going to feel better by saying that? No. What you're doing here is sort of mentally trying to separate the past from the present. Part B now, though, is by saying this, you need to act differently. The first step in doing that is go, okay, how do I really feel? So the example I often use is, okay, you have a staff meeting at work and your supervisor says, we're looking for a volunteer to do X. And your hand automatically goes up. You don't even think about it. You know, you're just Mr. Good Doobie who just kind of volunteers for every darn thing in the world. And, you know, and what I say to folks is, if 2 hours later you go, I don't have time to do this. You know, what was I thinking? I'm already swamped. Or if it takes you 2 days to figure out that you really don't want to do this or whatever, you want to pay attention to that gut reaction. You want to pay, because that's information about you and it's information about what you need. You don't want to push it away. Part B of that is now you want to act on it. Now, what's going to happen if you act on it is that little kid part of you is going to get scared. You know, even just kind of typing an email to your supervisor and say you've thought it over and you'd like to not be on the committee, you're going to be scared to death.
Of the reaction.
Absolutely. Because that little kid part is going, what are you, crazy?
Right.
That old wiring's kicking in. You want to act in spite of. The antidote in general to anxiety is your anxiety tells you, be more careful, be more perfect, walk on eggshells better, make sure you keep everybody happy. The rational brain part is you want to increase your comfort zone. You want to push against the anxiety. You need to take what I call acceptable risks to find out that what you think is going to happen doesn't happen. You're going to send the email to your boss and you're going to be scared to death about the fact that you're going to get fired because your little kid brain is kicking up. And then you get an email back. She goes, I'm disappointed, but no big deal. I'll find somebody else. Thanks for letting me know. These are corrective emotional experiences. What you're doing now is you're doing with your boss what you couldn't do with your parents, which is being assertive. It's about speaking up. It's about telling people what you need. And if you start to accumulate these experiences, if you do this 500 times, you begin to rewire your brain. You find out that other people in the world are not as dangerous and unsafe as you originally thought. And you build up your confidence because you increase your comfort zone.
And it starts with, it sounds like, taking what you said, acceptable risks.
Absolutely.
Just very
listening to your gut.
Very small things. But let's talk about talking to yourself, because do we all talk to ourselves some sort of internal way? Or are we all internalizing, you think?
To some degree. I mean, some people are more aware of it than others. A lot of folks who walk on eggshells also have this kind of critical voice running in their heads all the time. They make a mistake and they kind of start to go down this rabbit hole of scolding themselves and they could have done better and all kinds of other stuff. Some people are less aware of what they're thinking and they get more feelings and sensations. They just kind of get overwhelmed with anxiety or they just start to get depressed. But what I'm saying, part of it is beginning. Yes, you want what happens in your head, when those feelings kind of kick in. What happens? What kind of rabbit hole do you kind of go down and start thinking about when you feel insecure or intimidated or worried about something? Can you kind of tell? Right. And for a lot of folks, I see they if they have a hard time doing this, homework assignment I give them is you check in with yourself every hour. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 you're doing okay and you're flatline, and 10 you're getting crazy. You start to get to a 4 or 5. You want to ask yourself, okay, what's going on? How come I'm getting irritable? How come I'm in a funk? How come I'm getting anxious? What's happening? The next question you ask yourself is there a real problem I need to fix? Yes, actually, I haven't heard back from my husband about, picking up the kids. Or I haven't heard back from my boss about the work schedule. Or I don't know what happened to the check I mailed to whatever. If it's a real problem, that's a rational anxiety. You want to take decisive action to act on it. You want to put it to rest. You don't want to dither. You don't want to start walking on eggshells. You want to take action. If it's irrational, like, I don't know, I'm just kind of feeling irritable or whatever, that's about, okay, I need to do something actively to change my mood before it gets too high.
Hold that thought. Let's take a break here. But when we come back, I want to talk about people who are walking on eggshells, and it's irrational anxiety. But to them, it is so rational that they don't know how to break it. Our guest this morning is Robert Tavy. Stay on point. We're back with more of this conversation right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This morning, we're talking about the millions of people that suffer with anxiety, and not just adults, Robert, but children. We were talking about our babies that we adopted that as little people, we see anxiety show up.
Right.
How do we, is there a way to break that cycle? Is it a cycle? What is it? What is anxiety really? Where does it come from so early?
Sure. I mean, again, well, for a lot of children, unfortunately, they grow up in traumatic environments. They talk about, the people who work on attachment theories with kids,
Right.
you got 2-year window of opening, there where, because what happens after 2 years old is a lot of the connections in your brain are sloughed away. You
After
actually
2?
reduce a lot of the circuits in your brain, and the ones that remain are the ones that have been fired the most. So they talk about the first 2 years are critical for children because that's where all that imprinting comes from. If you're hot wired for always looking around corners where things are dangerous, where you're always aroused, where you never feel safe, that stuff stays there. I mean, the same thing happens with folks with, adults with PTSD. The car accident or the guys coming back from war, they're sitting in Burger King and somebody scrapes a chair and they're hitting the deck because their body and their minds are just hot wired for any kind of trauma. And so, how do you get over it? For the children, it's about, the beginning part is creating that safe environment. Mm-hmm. Helping them learn that people can be trusted. I used to work with kids who had reactive attachment disorder, and even at 5 years old, it's me against the world. Talk about walking on eggshells. They would be the nicest kids in the world. They would be so sweet and whatever, and then they'd be getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and getting scissors and cutting up people's clothes or setting fires or whatever. And they adopted this view of there's me against the world and I can't trust anybody. And I need to just say what I need to say to appease people and get them off my back. And then my anger comes out in other ways.
Wow.
And the treatment is to help them rewire their brain by helping them realize they needed both to trust other people and they needed to learn to lean on other people. Mm-hmm. They needed to learn to even accept affection.
Right. Now
because they could only do it on their terms and not anybody else's.
Right. Here's where I get concerned about the idea of rewiring your brain, especially an older brain, okay? A brain that is well developed with who you are. And then I see it like a forest, right? Where it's all grown up and you're starting a new path that has never been treaded upon. But after you've done a thing for 40 or 50 years, or even 20 years, it's just not that easy to create this new path because it's the path that has been least taken.
Absolutely.
Or never taken.
Absolutely. And this is where folks need, again, I'm saying a lot of it is about, you don't just think about it, you really need to push yourself to act differently. Again, anxiety is telling you the only way to feel better is to work harder. The only way to feel better is to be more careful. The only way to do better is to track down whatever's worrying you the most and try to get the right answer to everything you're worrying about. You don't want to do that. But that's why people who are, struggling with an addiction, they're going to be going to 30 meetings for 30 days. They need the support. They need the accountability. They need the sponsor they can call up at 2 o'clock in the morning when they're craving to have a drink or whatever it is. And they need to do this for a long enough time where they can begin to kind of change their brains. Mm-hmm. What the research shows for people who are, for example, struggling with addiction, it takes them about 9 to 12 months just for their brains to calm down. Even if they're doing the best thing they can do, their midbrain and cravings are going to be firing and firing and firing. And it takes that long just for the brain to settle. And and they're going to have to work it and they're going to need support. Same thing for the kids. When they start to get anxious and worried and they feel scared at school, whatever, they need a trusting adult to help calm them down. Mm-hmm. And kids can learn this. They've done research on they've done longitudinal studies about what makes for a good life, supposedly, what makes for contented adults. And they did a huge study a bunch of years ago, and they tracked these people for about 20 or 30 years. They found 3 elements. One was IQ. If you have a higher IQ, then you have more opportunities in life. On a similar vein, it was about socioeconomic status. If you grew up in a poor family, you have less of a starting point than somebody who grew up in a wealthy family. But the third one was about emotional regulation. What made people feel successful and content in their life was they were able to regulate their emotions. It could be anxiety, it could be anger, it could be whatever, but they needed to learn how to control them, because as an adult, if they couldn't control their thing, they're getting fired from their job.
Right.
They're working at McDonald's, and the third day out, they're going to get angry at their boss and they're going to get kicked out, or they're getting kicked out of school, or they're struggling in their marriages. So how do we teach kids that? How do we teach them how to calm themselves down? How do we teach them when their anger is starting to bubble up so it doesn't get too high and they can kind of rein it in? These are life skills.
Right.
And again, how do you learn that? And how do you change it? And can you change it as an adult? Absolutely.
Right. And so let's talk about those irrational anxieties, those things that just don't really make sense to anybody other than the person that's feeling that
Right.
sort of anxiety.
Yeah. Again, what happens in your brain is your amygdala fires where your emotional center. It fires up when you start to get anxious or upset. And the first thing it does is it sends chemicals to your prefrontal lobes, your rational brain. It goes offline. And now, the analogy I use is your brain's like a runaway horse. And it just starts running and you're just kind of hanging on. And it just kind of goes and goes and goes and goes. And now you get the irrational anxiety about this. And I didn't say, good morning to my boss, and I'm probably going to get fired. And because I did this, my husband's going to leave me. And you just kind of go down these rabbit holes. And again, you feel like you don't have a control over it. And your anxious brain is telling you the only way you're going to feel better is you got to figure this out. The only way, you better make it up with your boss, or you
Right.
better whatever. And so, what I say to folks, the challenge here is you got to pull in the reins of the horse. You want to be able to kind of slow it down. This is the self-talk stuff again. I need to be able to do that, because what's going to happen is, for a lot of folks, and you mentioned it during the break, for a lot of folks, eventually the horse stops. And if you listen to what your anxiety tells you, unfortunately, you feel better. So if you have a germ phobia for a lot of good reasons, like the pandemic,
Right.
or you already had one,
Mm-hmm.
if you wash your hands 5 times, you're going to feel better. What's going to happen, though, is one time you're going to wash your hands 5 times, and you're going to go, I didn't think I did a good job. Let me do it again. And what's going to happen is 5 times is going to turn into 50 times.
Mm.
And so the antidote to that is realizing, okay, I'm getting caught up in this. My anxiety is kind of taking over. I need to push back. And, the standard treatment for this kind of stuff is I'm going to wash my hands 4 times. What's going to happen now is my anxiety is going to go through the roof because I'm breaking the pattern. But I need to find out, I need to white knuckle it or get support and find out that I wake up the next day and I'm not dead.
Right. Nothing is going to happen because I didn't wash my
Right.
hands that 5th time.
But you got it. Because your irrational brain is going to be saying, "Oh my God, you're going to catch COVID. You're going to be dead by tomorrow morning."
Right.
And you need to push back against it and do it 4 times, and then you do it 3 times, and then you do it 2 times. And it's okay to take baby steps.
Right. And those are those acceptable risks that you talked about.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so is it possible, Robert, that people can get better without seeing a therapist? Or do you almost really have to have a therapist when you have a certain level of anxiety that in many ways becomes debilitating?
Sure. It depends on how bad it is. For some people, it is really circumstantial. I really have a hard time in my marriage, or I'm having a hard time with my boss, but other people, I'm fine. Or for other people, it is overwhelming. They have, generalized anxiety and they're just incapacitated. So, this is where a lot of folks need medication. The medication helps in terms of changing your brain, but it also helps break the cycle. It takes enough of the edge off the anxiety so I can take these acceptable risks. So I can begin to take these baby steps. And then oftentimes you can get some momentum. A lot of folks I see for anxiety, I don't see them very long or they check in like every couple of weeks. Because once we figure out what it is they need to work on, they need to work on.
Right.
And again, what I do in therapy is we map out the baby steps.
I love it. Robert,
You know?
this has been an incredible conversation, and we want to thank you for taking the time. The article
You're
is on
welcome.
Psychology Today if you guys are interested in reading it. It's called Always Walking on Eggshells, How to Stop. Our guest this morning, Robert Tavy. Robert, before you got to go, tell people how they can find you and how they can connect with your body of work.
Sure. I have a website. It's my name. It's Bob Taibbi. Last name is taibbi.com. And it has links to my books and podcasts and CDs and all kinds of other stuff.
Absolutely. We'd love to visit again soon, Robert. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back right after this.